أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المكرمين الغرر الميامين، سيما بقية الله في الأراضين وحجته على الخلائق أجمعين، سيدنا وإمام زماننا وصاحب نعمتنا وولي أمرنا مهدي هذه الأمة وطاووس أهل الجنة الحجة بن الحسن العسكري فداه أرواح العالمين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. قال الله العظيم في محكم كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. من المؤمنين رجال صدقوا ما عاهدوا الله. من المؤمنين رجال صدقوا ما عاهدوا الله عليه، فمنهم من قضى نحبه ومنهم من ينتظر وما بدلوا تبديلا. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. A question that is often raised is with regards to some of the members of the Ahlulbayt, or some of the well-known companions of Imam al-Hassan, Imam Ali, Imam al-Hussain, and why they did not join Imam al-Hussain in Karbala. So in order to look at the companions of Imam al-Hussain and discover why those who were martyred on the plains of Karbala did so, I think it would be interesting to look at the ones who did not join Imam al-Hussain and who were not killed in Karbala, and to look at the issue from that perspective in order to gain a better insight into the greatness of the ones who did. So why was Kumail absent from the events of Ashura? Why was Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah absent from the fighting that occurred on the plains of Karbala? Why were some of these very well-known companions and often members of the Ahlul Bayt, Abdullah ibn Ja'far, the husband of Lady Zainab alayhi salam, why was he not in Karbala? Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Why was Ibn Abbas not in Karbala? The same question was asked from Ibn Abbas himself. They said to him, why did you not join Abu Abdullah al-Hussain in his journey, in his mission? Because you would have received the greatest badge of honor ever awarded to any companions of any great man of God. He responded by what I would describe as perhaps dodging the question in a way. But I think it's quite telling about the nature of the companions of Imam al-Hussain. You know what he said? He said that we knew the names of the companions of Imam al-Hussain. Remember, Ibn Abbas was a companion of Amir al-Mu'mineen. He was a man, obviously the Imam's cousin, quite a close companion, a confidant if you like. There were two Ibn Abbas, by the way, two people labeled as Ibn Abbas. One is Abdullah ibn al-Abbas, the other is Ubaydillah ibn al-Abbas. Ubaydillah ibn al-Abbas was a person who was on the opposing camp of the Ahlul Bayt, unfortunately, even though he was a cousin of the Imam. But Abdullah ibn Abbas, though some people see him as being quite dubious at times, but was considered to be among the companions of the Imam. So, having been with Amir al-Mu'mineen, having then lived through the life of Imam al-Hassan, and then Imam al-Hussain, he says that we knew the names of the companions of Imam Hussain even before the birth of Imam al-Hussain. The commander of the faithful has a statement, again, very astonishing about the nature of the companions of the Imam, the Ansar, in that he says the Ansar of Hussein, the companions of Hussein, the supporters of Hussein, were selected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fi alam al-dhar, in the world preceding this world, in the world of the atom, in the world in which human beings were nothing but a stem cell. Human beings were nothing but that original substance from which men and women were created later on, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala presented His divinity to people, to mankind, and took from them the oath and allegiance and belief in the existence of the Creator. The Imam says that it was in that world that the companions of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein were selected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which is amazing in that, number one, these people didn't simply appear at the right place and the right time. It's not a matter of coincidence that a person like Habib ibn Mudahir joins the camp of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. The Imam sends him a letter specifically requesting him to come from Kufa and join the Imam in Karbala. There is divine providence involved. There is a plan that's being executed by Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. I want you, O Habib, not the other thousands, and perhaps some people say that the population of the city of Kufa in that time was close to 1 million people. So out of 1 million individuals, the Imam decides to send a letter to just one person, and that's Habib. It's not coincidence that Zuhair ibn al-Qayn would join the camp of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. Even though, again, this is what makes the hadith about Alam al-Dhar quite amazing, and I don't want to talk too much about this because it does get quite tricky at times to talk about Alam al-Dhar and what's referred to in Islamic aqaid and kalam, if you like, as at-tina, right? Which explains why some people who are disbelievers in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala often do good things, and why believers in Allah often do bad things. There's an explanation for that in the question of Tina, but I don't want to get into that right now. What's amazing is that Zuhair ibn al-Qayn was a Uthmani, and the definition of a Uthmani was a person who believed that Uthman was murdered by orders from Amir al-Mu'mineen. What does that mean? It means that in today's terminology, in today's jargon, they were Wahhabis. Uthmani was a person who despised the commander of the faithful for having killed Uthman, the great thirsty martyr of Allah. Zuhair ibn al-Qayn was a Uthmani, and yet he joins the camp of Imam Hussain. He is killed, and he's one of the people that the Imam specifically calls out when he's left with no other Ansar. Imam Hussain calls his name. So he was selected, he was pre-selected. It was predestined for him to be with Imam Hussain, and yet he's a Uthmani. What that proves is that even if you had made the right decision in Alam al-Dhar, even if you were a believer there is no such thing as predestination. You are still endowed with free will, which means that there is always a chance that we could go astray. You're a good person now, you're a believer in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're a lover of the Ahlulbayt, and that's wonderful, that's a great blessing. But be careful, because you could always go astray. There's always the chance that something might happen in my life, a tragedy, a problem, an opportunity, a gift, a blessing, whatever it is, that might push me to the fringes, that might push me away from the straight path. And that's why we have to be ever vigilant, careful at all times, be in the constant state of remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, begging and pleading and asking Him for guidance. That's why you're a Muslim, and you're a Muslim who prays, and you're a Muslim who prays and who also loves the Ahlul Bayt, and yet 17 times a day when you pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you say, Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. Guide me to the straight path. You'd think that you're already on the straight path, and you are. But you have to constantly Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep you on the straight path. So, Ibn Abbas says that we knew the names of these companions long before Imam al-Hussein was even born. They mention a story in which the Prophet is walking with some of his companions in the streets and alleyways of the holy city of Medina when they spot a group of kids playing. You must have heard the hadith. A group of kids are playing. One of the kids is Imam al-Hussein, the Prophet's beloved grandson. All of a sudden the Prophet approaches one of these children, who's slightly older perhaps than the others. He embraces him, takes him into his arm, and he begins to kiss him. Ya Rasulullah, why this child and not everybody else? What's so special about this one? The Prophet said that this is going to be one of the supporters of my grandson Hussein ibn Ali in Karbala. Who was he? Habib ibn Mudahir. They said, how do you know, Ya Rasulullah? He said, I just saw something quite odd and peculiar about this kid. What was he doing? He was running after my grandson, taking the dirt and the dust from beneath his feet and kissing it. Even though they're all children, but he knows there's something special about that one child called Hussein. He sees the Prophet kissing him, therefore he's special. So, the companions of Imam al-Hussein were pre-selected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is why historians say that when the Imam left the holy city of Medina, proceeded towards Mecca, and then from Mecca went towards Kufa, at every stop, the Imam would have more and more people joining his caravan. Every single stop, people would realize this is Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, Sibtu Rasulillah, Rayhanatul Nabi. And they were also informed about the fact that the Imam was heading towards Kufa. They all knew that Muawiyah had died and Yazid had taken his place. Therefore, Imam al-Hussein must be going towards Kufa in order to reclaim the throne that belongs to him. So they would join him. And you would have more and more people joining the Imam's caravan as he continued his journey towards Kufa. Here's what's really interesting. At some point, in a village called Az-Zabala or Az-Zubala, two people approached the camp of Imam al-Hussein. One of the companions of the Imam spots these individuals. He says, where have you come from? They say, we've come from Kufa. He says, so do you have any news about the events in Kufa? What's happening? Muslim ibn Aqil is there. They say to him, we did not leave the city of Kufa until we saw the body of Muslim ibn Aqil being dragged along the streets and alleyways of the city. Muslim has been killed. This was the very first indication that what people thought was the Imam going to Kufa in order to reclaim the throne wasn't that at all. This was the first shockwave that permeated through the camp of Imam al-Hussein. They thought the Imam was going to go to Kufa, become the king or Khalifa or what have you, and maybe we'd be able to get a piece of the pie along the way. Most of the people who had joined the Imam's caravan, that's what they thought. That was their mentality. Let's go. Yes, he is the grandson of the Prophet, but he's also going to be the Khalifa. Maybe we're going to get something out of this. All of a sudden, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala filters the good from the bad through this event. So this companion rushes back to Imam al-Hussein. He says to him, Ya Aba Abdullah, I have some news that I'd like to deliver. It's urgent news, but I'd like to speak to you in private. The Imam looks around. His companions were with him. His real Ansar were with him. The Imam said, there is no secret between me and these guys. You could speak freely. He said, Ya Aba Abdullah, I just saw two people. They have just reported to me that Muslim ibn Aqil has been martyred. Then, historians say that when that news broke, all of a sudden, every single person that had joined the Imam's caravan left, leaving only the people that had left from him from Mecca. Filtration. Swifting through the good and the bad. Because those who are going to spill their blood on the plains of Karbala are the best of the best. They're the cream of the crop. Not just anybody gets the chance to do these things. I remember I once went to meet a man who passed away, rahmatullah alayhi, a couple of years ago. Sayyid Muhammad Ali Shahristani, some of you might have known him. He used to live here in London. After he had received a mandate from the Marja'iyya, from the Maraja in the holy city of Najaf and Qum, as well as the government in Iraq, to rebuild the shrines of the Ahlulbayt alayhim salam in Iraq, to rebuild, expand the shrine of Imam Hussain in Karbala, redesign and expand the shrine in Najaf, and perhaps more importantly, to reconstruct and rebuild the shrines of the Askariyin in Samarra. I went to see him. I said to him, Sayyidina, I told him the hadith of Ibn Abbas, who said that we knew the names of these people. They had been inscribed in the Lawh Mahfuz, Al-Lawh al-Mahfuz, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, thousands of years ago. And I told him, Sayyidina, the fact that you've been given the honor of rebuilding the shrines of the Ahlul Bayt, that's not something you get just by coincidence. It means you've been selected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You've been blessed by Allah. And these blessings don't come from a vacuum. These honors, if you ever come across such an honor, such a responsibility, it means either you've done something really special, or your parents have done something really special, or you have served your parents in a way that has made them perhaps pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant you something special. I know one of the ulama who lives in the holy city of Mashhad. He's an author. He's not a very prolific speaker. I asked him to appear on, perhaps do some recordings and record some lectures and so forth. He said, no, I'm not a good speaker, I'm a writer. He says that whenever I go and visit the Maraja in the holy city of Najaf or Karbala, and I give them whatever new book, whatever new publication that I have, they tell me that out of all the books that we receive from all over the world, your books are the ones that we always look forward to. I said to him, what's your secret? He said, to be honest with you, I'm a simple man. But there is one thing I've done in my life. And that is that when my father was old and frail, he fell ill. And he was so sick that I needed to wash him and bathe him and feed him, as a father would do to his infant, to his baby. Sometimes people grow too old and they can't take care of themselves. He says, I took in my father for 17 years. None of my brothers did that. None of my sisters did that. I was the one who said, you know what? He's my father. He brought me into this world. He raised me. He fed me. He did so many good things to me. And now it's my turn to pay him back, for at least pay some of the debt that I owe him. And so I took him in for 17 years. And I believe that this is my secret, the secret of my success, the fact that my books are so popular and so beneficial, and even the Maraja look forward to reading them. So sometimes don't ever underestimate the value of even the smallest good deed, brothers and sisters. The smallest good deed. I remember I was a kid and I'd see people praying Salat al-Wutayra after Salat al-Isha. The 2 rak'at that you pray while sitting down. And I remember saying once, my father said to me, why don't you get up and pray with us? I was just a kid. I said to him, I've just prayed Salat al-Maghrib and Isha. So I'm tired now. He said, listen, don't underestimate this. Yes, this is something that takes a few minutes. It's just a wutayra, right? It actually equals 1 rak'ah. But don't underestimate this. It could be this deed, as small as it is, that tips the balance in your favor on the day of judgment. It could be this deed that takes you to heaven. Anyway, the companions of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein were special. They had done things. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had blessed them and honored them to be with Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. That's why everybody was filtered. And the second filtration came on the night of Ashura, when Imam al-Hussein clearly and unequivocally told everyone, take the hands of your companions, your friends, your family members, and go. Nobody wants you. They're here for me, not for you. The Imam said to them, إِنَّ الْقَوْمَ يَطْلُبُونَنِي. They're not looking for you. فَإِنْ ظَفَرُوا بِي. And if they get a hold of me, then they couldn't care less about you. So leave, go back to your families, go back to your friends. The Imam told them very clearly. The only person the Imam asked to stay back with him was Ali al-Akbar. He even told Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas to leave. The Imam, listen, this is such a great honor. Every single one of the people who were slain on the plains of Karbala, on Imam Hussein's camp, they were being handpicked by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to play a role that would reverberate through history forever. For as long as the sun rises and sets, millions upon millions of people will be singing praises of the companions of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. These are people who have offered us lessons in morality, lessons in humanity, lessons in how to be servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that are timeless, that can't have any value associated to them. And so they needed to be filtered out. Even Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to test them. So the Imam says to him, take the hands of your brothers, go back. All I want to stay with me, the only one I want to stay with me is Ali al-Akbar, my son. Why? Because the Imam wants to offer him as a sacrifice, and inshallah we'll talk about that on the designated night. Now, when it comes to the companions of the Imam, there are some discrepancies, differences of opinion as to their exact number. Generally speaking, people say that the companions were 72 in total. But that is not necessarily the case. Let me explain. First of all, as an introduction, we have two sources of historical records about the event of Ashura and the saga of Imam Hussain. And you have to make a distinction between the two sources. One is regular historical accounts, things that you would get from historians, reporters, people who were there in Karbala on the enemy's side, or just being impartial and recording the events as they happened. This is what we call history. History books are full of facts about the event of Ashura. A lot of Sunni ulama have narrated the events of Ashura, and they rely heavily on this particular type of source. The other is narrations of the Ahlulbayt. Sometimes people say, how do we know how many wounds were on the sacred body of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein? And the question is often raised by skeptics, by people trying to cast doubt in the minds of regular Shia youths who say, how do we know we had this many wounds? How many arrows were shot at the Imam? How do we know who was killed first and last? How do we know the details of the conversation between Zainab and Abbas on the night of Ashura? I'll tell you how we know that. We know it because Imam al-Sadiq told us. We know it because Imam al-Baqir told us. These are people who are inspired by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We trust them with our religion. Let me tell you an interesting hadith. Once a woman came to Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. And I'm going a little off track, but I think it's interesting. She came to the Imam, said to him, Ya ibn Rasulullah, I am sick. And doctors have told me that in order to be cured, I need to drink a certain amount of alcohol. There are doctors today who tell you that alcohol has its health benefits. In fact, one doctor in the US asked me, he said, if a patient asks me specifically about the consumption of alcohol and whether it's good or bad for them, what do? He said, I'm obligated as a medical professional to give him the latest medical opinion on the matter. Do I tell him that yes, consuming alcoholic beverages is good for your blood flow, for instance, or that it could increase your lifespan if you drink red wine or whatever? I said to him, absolutely not. Absolutely not. The worst case scenario is you don't respond to the question and say, I don't know. But to encourage the consumption of alcohol? So she says to the Imam that the doctors have told me I need to drink some alcohol. The Imam said to her, what did you do? She said, I said no. I would die before I drink a drop of alcohol. So the Imam was sitting with some of his companions. He wanted to teach them a lesson. He said, but why? Why didn't you drink? The doctor's telling you it's good for your health. She said, because you told me that it's haram. وَإِنِّي قَدْ قَلَّدْتُكَ دِينِي. She said, I have entrusted you with my religion. If you say that it's haram, then it's haram. I don't care what happens to me. The Imam said to his companions, see, this is real belief. This isn't just faith anymore. This is belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and in the words of the Imams. These are infallible human beings. We take whatever they say, no questions asked, because our logic and our rationale and our mind told us that these are the right people to follow. And it's not just about sentiments or emotions or anything like that. That's the difference between us and everybody else. We say that it's the human intellect which tells me that the Imams of Ahlulbayt are the ones that we need to seek our knowledge from. And once I've established that rationally and logically, I follow them, no questions asked. So, the discrepancy, going back to the main question, the discrepancy between the number of companions stems from the following. We have historical records and we have words of the Ahlul Bayt. How so? The number 72 actually comes from a book called Mahdi Al Hussain Abi Mikhnaf. Abu Mikhnaf was a Sunni historian. He's relied upon when it comes to the events of Ashura, generally speaking, because he happened to be the earliest source of historical records on the event. Who does he quote his facts from? He quotes several sources. Hamid ibn Muslim, for instance, who was one of the reporters who was in Karbala. Incidentally, Hamid ibn Muslim, I believe that anyone, according to the words of Imam al-Hussein himself, anyone who heard the cries of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein asking for help and refused to offer his help is hellbound without a shadow of doubt. So Hamid ibn Muslim, he was the kind of person who said, I'm just a reporter. I'm a professional. I'm not here to fight. I'm just here to record the events. But later, obviously, having seen the events transpire before his two eyes, he realized what a big mistake he'd made. So he joined the Tawwabin. He actually joined the revolution of those known as the Tawwabun. What happens to them in the hereafter, I don't know. One of the sources of Abu Mikhnaf is Hamid ibn Muslim. The other source that actually specifies the number 72 is a man by the name of Dhahhak ibn Abdullah. Who is Dhahhak ibn Abdullah? One of the people who joined the caravan of Imam al-Hussein. But before he joined the Imam, he made a pact with him. He said, Ya Abu Abdullah, you're going on this voyage. We don't know what's going to happen. You keep talking about death and carnage and children getting slaughtered. So I want to stay on the safe side. He says to the Imam that I'm going to bring along my horse. If things start to go south, if things are not looking too good in terms of your ability to survive, if I can't help you, if I can't make you, if I can't protect you, then I'll excuse myself. The Imam said to him, that's okay, that's fine. So he came with the Imam. Before noon on the day of Ashura, he realized that things weren't going to work out for the Imam. He comes to him, he says, Ya Abu Abdullah, remember my pact? The Imam said, yes. He said, then I'm going to bid you farewell. The Imam said to him, but how are you going to go? We have no horses, we have no... He said, no, I've got a horse lined up. This kind of person, now he's one of the sources of narrations, he's one of the sources of the facts and events about the day of Ashura. But you'd be hard-pressed thinking that this guy is going to go to heaven, having abandoned Abu Abdullah al-Hussein at noon on the day of Ashura. So Al-Dhahhak, subhanAllah, sometimes God takes away His blessings from certain individuals. Haven't you noticed how some people, someone who might have an office, someone who might have a position in the community, in society, he has the ability to serve, he doesn't, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala snaps it away from him. And so God takes away His tawfiq, His divine backing from Dhahhak, Dhahhak goes back. Right? regretted doing so, and he died soon after. How did he die? It doesn't matter. But eventually, on the day of Qiyamah, he'll be truly sorry for having abandoned the Imam. He's the one who narrates the names, or who lists the names of 72 companions. However, we have other sources which suggest that the number was far higher, up to 120 companions. One of those sources is a Ziyaratun Nahiya. There are two Ziyaratun Nahiya, by the way. One is the famous ziyarah that we recite on the afternoon of Ashura. The other is not so famous. They're both narrated by Allam al-Majlisi in Bihar al-Anwar. This ziyarah lists 81 companions. 81 companions, 13 of whom are Hashemites. Ziyarah al-Rajabiyya, also narrated in Bihar al-Anwar, lists 88 companions, 17 of whom are Hashemites. A scholar who passed away some years ago by the name of Sheikh Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin, a Lebanese alim in Beirut, he has written a very valuable book on the companions of Imam Hussain, a very comprehensive, thorough study on the Ansar, called Ansar al-Hussain. In that book, he explains the discrepancy in this way. He says the reason we have different lists with different numbers and names that are sometimes common and sometimes not, is that there were people who were killed prior to the day of Ashura. In other words, in the events leading up to the day of Ashura, up to 10 people were killed. Muslim ibn Aqil, Hani ibn Urwa, Qais ibn Musahhar al-Saydawi. These were people who were killed before Ashura. And we also have up to 8 people who were killed after, in the aftermath of Ashura. They include Abdullah ibn Afif al-Azdi, whose story some of you might have heard. He's an individual who rose up in Kufa as Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad was delivering his sermon celebrating the massacre of Ashura, and he slandered Imam al-Hussain in that sermon. He said, قَتَلَ اللَّهُ الْكَذَّابِ ibn al-Kadhab, and then he mentioned the Imam's name. Abdullah ibn Afif al-Azdi, an old companion of Amir al-Mu'mineen, who was blinded. One of his eyes was lost in Siffin. The other eye was lost in Nahrawan. Look at his track record. He stands up in the middle of the crowd. Al-Kadhab, anta wa abuk, wa man hakkamaka wa abuh. You're the liar. Your father is a liar. Liar is the one who appointed you. His father is the liar. You're calling Abu Abdullah al-Hussain, the grandson of Rasulullah, a liar. Woe unto you. Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad realized that this man was disrupting the peace. He was making people aware of the truth of the matter. He had him killed in a very famous story that we might be able to refer to later on. So that's one person who was killed in the aftermath of Ashura. Another person is a man by the name of Ibn Muhannad, who was one of the companions of Amir al-Mu'mineen who lived in Basra. Ibn Muhannad received news that the Imam was heading towards Kufa or Karbala. So he departs Basra in order to join the Imam. By the time he arrives in Karbala, he notices that the enemy were rejoicing the murder of Hussein. He arrives at the exact moment that the Imam was killed. So Imam Zayn al-Abidin actually lauds this individual. There's a hadith about him. The Imam says that he came, and in a very valiant way, he was a very young, courageous man. He pulled out his sword and he fought the enemy, killing some of them. Eventually he was killed. Here's an individual who was killed in the aftermath of Ashura. That's why there is a discrepancy. Now moving on from the numbers, Imam al-Hussain says something about the companions, which, when you think about it, the companions of Abu Abdullah al-Hussain, we're not trying to recount the events that shaped their lives or anything. In the next few nights, inshallah, I'd like to talk about the features and the qualities and the characteristics of the companions of Imam al-Hussain, so that you and I might be able to try and imitate them a little bit, try and emulate them, be a little more like them. When you and I say, Ya laytana kunna ma'akum fanafuza fawzan azima, I wish I was with you so that we would be victorious, shouldn't we try to resemble the companions of the Imam? So that this wishing isn't just wishing, and rather a plan of action. At the end of the day, there is going to be a reckoning for Imam al-Hussein. There's going to be a day when his grandson reappears and he's going to need supporters. He's going to need Ansar. In order for you and I to stand any chance of joining the ranks of his Ansar, the 12th Imam, we need to realize what it took to be a companion of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. So we're not trying to recount the events that shaped their lives. We're certainly not trying to offer a biography of each and every one of them. Why? Because it's literally impossible. Brothers and sisters, sometimes I hear people talking about the biography of Imam Ali, the biography of Imam al-Hussein, the biography. Who are we kidding? We can't possibly offer a biography. A biography suggests that you're encompassing, it's an all-encompassing view of their lives. You and I can't possibly offer a biography of John, the black slave of Abu Dharr who was killed in Karbala. Let alone Imam al-Hussein, let alone the commander of the faithful. Let's not play that game. What you need to say instead is, we are shining a light on the luminous lives of the Ahlulbayt, learning some of the lessons of the lives of Imam al-Hussein. Yes, that makes sense, but a biography? So that's not what we're trying to do with the companions. What are we trying to do? We're trying to highlight some of the most important features that contributed to their character. You know how sometimes self-help books and personal development books are ripe with examples of people who are successful. In order for you to be successful, you need to learn from those who are successful, right? It's common sense. That's why these books are, bestsellers, because what they're trying to teach you is the habits of highly effective people. We're trying to learn the habits of the companions of Imam al-Hussein. Because these are individuals that the Imam, and here's, I think, what you need to remember throughout this series. The Imam says something about his companions, which basically and unequivocally sets the record straight about their status. The Imam says, إِنِّي لَا أَعْلَمُ أَصْحَابًا أَوْلَى وَلَا خَيْرًا مِّنْ أَصْحَابِي وَلَا أَهْلَ بَيْتٍ أَبَرَّ وَلَا أَوْفَى مِنْ أَهْلِ بَيْتِي. I do not know. Who's talking here? It's Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, who knows what's in the universe. Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, the son of the one who says, I am more familiar with the pathways of the celestial realm than I am with the pathways of this earth. He says, I do not know, meaning that there does not exist companions who are better than my companions, and members of a household who are more loyal than my household. And if you put that into historical perspective, you look at the Prophet, who had companions who would doubt him, who would object to him, companions who would come to Rasulullah when he is distributing the war booty in one of the battles, and they would say to him, "I'dil, i'dil, be just," meaning that you're being unjust. Companions who would hurt him, companions who would say, "Ma shakaktu bi Rasulillah kashakki bihi fi sulh al-Hudaybiyah." The Prophet signs a pact with the idolaters that this year the idolaters get to do the Hajj. They get to do the pilgrimage. Next year, the Muslims will do the pilgrimage. So the companions who were with him, they were expecting a war, and at the end of the war, obviously they wouldn't be the ones fighting, right? They'd be the ones out there looking at the commander of the faithful doing all the fighting for them. But they were expecting this to somehow end with them going to Mecca, feeling glorious and taking over the entire town. All of a sudden, the Prophet tests them. He said, no, that's not how it's going to work. We're going to sign a pact. This year we'll let them do the Hajj, we'll go back. So one of them says, I have never doubted the message of this man, the Prophet, the way I doubted him in Sulh al-Hudaybiyah. In other words, I've always doubted him. I've always had doubts about his prophethood, but now I have certainty. These are the kind of companions the Prophet had. I'm not saying all of them were like that, but he had individuals who exhibited these characteristics, to the point that Sahih Bukhari says that on the day of judgment, the Holy Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, on the day of judgment, I will see some of my companions being driven away from the pond of Kawthar. So I say to Allah, Ya Rab, ashabi, oh God, these are my companions, quote unquote, my friends. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to me, إِنَّكَ لَا تَدْرِي مَا أَحْدَثُوا بَعْدَكَ. O Messenger, you don't know what they did after your death. We all know what they did after the Prophet's death. This is the Messenger of Allah, the commander of the faithful. How were his companions like? Suffice to say the following. The Imam at one stage went on the minbar and he said, Allahumma, oh God, here's a prayer by the commander of the faithful. Allahumma abdilni khayran minhum wa abdilhum sharran minni. Oh God, replace them with better companions for me and replace me with a worse ruler for them. One of the companions of the Imam, he was an impious person, not a very moral individual. On the month, in the month of Ramadan, on a day where everybody was fasting, he drinks alcohol. So the Imam is informed about this, witnesses spot him, there's no question. The Imam says he must be whipped. So they bring him to the Imam whips him. After being whipped and punished by the Imam, he then runs off to Muawiyah's camp. This is during the Battle of Siffin. Remember, in Siffin was a battle that dragged on for too long. And so he gets a taste of Imam Ali's justice. He runs off to Muawiyah's camp. As soon as he enters, Muawiyah was always very happy to receive people who had left Imam Ali's camp. Deserters and individuals who had turned their back to the Imam. He says to him, so what made you run? He said to him, I ran from the justice of Ali to the oppression of Muawiyah. He's running from Ali, but he knows that he can't get any justice the way he got it with Amir al-Mu'mineen. So this is Amir al-Mu'mineen. لَقَدْ سَئِمْتُهُمْ وَسَئِمُونِي, the Imam says at one stage. Oh God, I am sick and tired of them. And they're sick and tired of me. Take me to you. What about Imam al-Hasan? Again, suffice to say that Imam al-Hasan had some of his companions assault his tent and stab him in the thigh. This was not friendly fire, brothers and sisters. This was a deliberate assassination attempt against the Imam's life. And yet, you come to Imam al-Hussain and the Imam says, I don't know of any companions better than these individuals. Again, as we said, up to 120 of these noble men of God. They had the old and the young, they had the peasant and the noble, and they had all kinds of people. Honestly, each one of them is an example for people to follow. They are examples for every member of society. I once gave a lecture in Canada, which was specifically on the subject of Christians in the path of Imam al-Hussain. The number of Christian individuals who came across Imam al-Hussain, which is odd if you think about it. There weren't many Christians in Iraq in those days, not many Christians around Kufa. And yet the encounters that Christian men and women had with Imam al-Hussain is just absolutely amazing and mesmerizing. So even a Christian can relate to Imam al-Hussain in many ways, right? So we talk about them in order to learn from them. Let me give you an example. One of the companions of the Imam, his name is Nafi' ibn Hilal. Don't confuse him with Hilal ibn Nafi'. If I get the chance, inshallah, in the next few days, what I'll do is perhaps we'll publish a table of the names of the companions of the Imam with details about how they were killed, their age, and so forth, and maybe we could distribute that. But Nafi' ibn Hilal was one of the young, courageous, valiant Ansar of Imam al-Hussain. There was another man by the name of Hilal ibn Nafi'. He was on Umar ibn Sa'd's camp. But Nafi' ibn Hilal was one of the masterful archers of Imam's camp, number one. Number two, he was one of the people who fetched water for the Imam on the 7th night. On the eve of the 7th day of Muharram, there were attempts to bring water back to the camp, and some of those attempts were successful. One of them were that of Nafi' ibn Hilal. Number three, one of the things he did was that he would take guard duty. His camp was very close to his tent was very close to the camp of the Hawashim, to the camp of the Hashemites, in order to protect them. So you can imagine what a great person this is, and what a great responsibility the Imam has entrusted to him. Very young as well. This man, he comes to Abu Abdullah al-Hussain. He says to him the following. Let's talk about the first feature of the companions of Imam Hussain that I'd like to draw your attention to. He says, Ya Aba Abdullah, inna ala niyatina wa basairina nu'adi man adak wa nuwali man walak. He says, Ya Aba Abdullah, we are going to stand firmly on the commitment that we made to you. By the commitment that we made and the intentions that we displayed. Our intention was to support you. It wasn't so that we could overthrow Yazid. And inshallah, if we get a chance, I want to talk and elaborate on the objectives of Imam al-Hussein. You'd be surprised how many differences of opinion there are. But what's clear and obvious is that these people, the companions of the Imam, we're not talking about the Imam himself, the companions joined him to protect his life and nothing else. That was their job. So they come and he says to the Imam that we stand by our commitments, number one, وَبَصَائِرِنَا, we stand by our basira. The number one feature of the companions. What is basira? Basira is a deep insight into the reality of things. I'll explain more inshallah, but bear with me with this story. He says to him, Inna ala niyatina wa basairina nuwali man walak wa nu'adi man adak. We befriend your friend and we show enmity to your enemy. I don't care who it is. Then he says, Wala nahabul maut, and we do not fear death. They ask one of the commanders of Umar ibn Sa'd's army. They say to him, when he goes back to Kufa, they say to him, أَوَهَلْ قَتَلْتُمْ إِبْنَ بِنْتِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ وَأَهْلَ بَيْتِهِ? Did you really kill Imam al-Hussein and his family members? Do you know what he says? He says, وَمَا تُرِيدُ مِنَّا أَن نَفْعَلْ. What would you have us do? When he came with supporters and companions, كَالْلِيُوثِ الْغَاضِبَةِ, they were like angry lions. لَا يَهَابُونَ الْمَوْتِ, they did not fear death. We could not make them afraid of anything. If you're not afraid of death, you're not afraid of anything. He says, كَانَ الْوَاحِدُ مِنْهُمْ, each one of them would come inside the battlefield. فَكَانَ يَقْلِبُ يُمْنَانَا عَلَى يُسْرَانَا, he would turn the right flank of the army onto the left flank of the army. Each one of them. In other words, what he's saying is that they had such courage, such bravery, such steadfastness, such firm belief that they would single-handedly face an entire army of 30,000 people. He says, what would you have us do? We were filled with fear from them, his companions. That's why we killed them, and we killed them all. So they killed the Imam, not because of this is really important, it's crucial, not based on a sense of overpowering the Imam, but out of fear. They killed the companions out of fear. And that's saying something when you have 120 people on one side and 30,000 people on the other. They say that by the time the troops of Umar ibn Sa'd were stationed in Karbala, there were still people conjoined in a straight line from Kufa to that camp. That's how many people were there. And yet he says, we were filled with fear from 120 people. So, this same man, Nafi' ibn Hilal, on the day of Ashura, was wounded. They broke both his arms. They crushed his arms. So they took him as a wounded captive to the tent of Umar ibn Sa'd. He enters. Look at the firm belief. I swear it's for no reason. You have Imam al-Hussein saying that these are the best companions. You know, it makes perfect sense. He comes inside the tent. Umar ibn Sa'd said to him, "Ma fa'alt? What have you done?" He said, from what I know, قتلت منكم 12. I've killed 12 people from your camp. ولا أدري, but I'm not so sure. There were others that I wounded, and maybe they joined their comrades in hell. So I'm not exactly sure how many people I killed. Umar ibn Sa'd ordered Shimr ibn al-Jawshan to slaughter him, to kill him. He was one of the people killed by Shimr ibn al-Jawshan as well. What an honor. What an honor. Kumayl ibn Ziyad, remember, says to Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi, Hajjaj says, I'm going to kill you. And I know that there is no one better than you in this entire town. You're one of the companions of Ali. I kill you while I know who you are. Kumayl ibn Ziyad said, Alhamdulillah. He said, I thank God, for I have always prayed to Him. Look at this prayer. He said, I've always prayed to God to bring my death at the hand of His most vile creature. I want the worst person to kill me. Imagine if you go to court, you have a legal case against the head of the mafia. It's a slam dunk case because he has so much enemies. There are so many people who want to see this person fall that if you have the worst person opposing you, you're going to win, at least in the public eye. He says, I want the worst person to kill me. So these are companions who had basira. What is basira? If you give me a few moments to talk about this, it's quite important. Basira is this. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi afdalus salatu wassalam is martyred. He's martyred by who? By Al-Mansur al-Dawaniqi, Al-Abbasi. Al-Mansur, having killed the Imam, is waiting to know who the successor is, who the next Imam is. So the companions and the Ahlulbayt of the Imam, the family members, they open the Imam's will. When they open it, they're shocked to see that instead of naming just one successor, the Imam has in fact named 5 successors. So 5 different options, and he says in the will that you could follow any one of these and he or she will be your Imam. You'd think that's confusing, right? Who are the 5 people? Number 1, Mansur al-Dawaniqi. Why? Because Mansur had instructed his troops that whoever gets appointed by Imam al-Sadiq must be killed immediately. This tells you that the Imam had knowledge of the unseen. A brilliant tactic. He names Mansur as his successor. Number 2, the governor of Medina. Number 3, the Imam's own wife. Number 4, the Imam's son, Abdullah ibn al-Aftah. Abdullah al-Aftah. And number 5, Musa ibn Ja'far. So someone goes to Kufa and he sees Abu Hamza al-Thumali. Abu Hamza al-Thumali, the famous narrator of the dua that we recite in the month of Ramadan, is sitting next to the shrine of Amir al-Mu'mineen, providing classes of exegesis, Quranic exegesis, tafsir al-Quran to Muslims. So he comes to Kufa, he sees Abu Hamza al-Thumali, and he says to him, Ya Abu Hamza, did you hear? Imam Sadiq has passed away. Fasah! Abu Hamza began crying and sobbing. So then when he calmed down a little bit, he said to him, who's the Khalifa? Who's the Imam? Who do I have to give my allegiance to? He said to him, well, that's the thing. The Imam has named 5 people and we don't know who's going to be the Khalifa. He said, who are the 5 people? So he listed the 5 names. As soon as Abu Hamza heard the names, he said, Alhamdulillah alladhi hadana. Thanks to Allah who has guided us to the truth. He said, but how are you guided to the truth? This is even more confusing than we thought. He said, how is it confusing? Al-Mansur al-Dawaniqi is an oppressive tyrant, so he can't be the Imam. The governor of Medina is also an oppressive tyrant. He can't be the Imam. The Imam's wife is a woman, and in order to assume the position of Imam, a woman cannot be an Imam. Number 4, Abdullah al-Aftah, who's the son of the Imam, but he was both physically and mentally challenged. So he can't be the Imam. That leaves the only remaining option, Musa ibn Ja'far. What is that? That is basira. That is the ability to see beyond the surface of things. Not be superficial about things. The reason the companions of Imam Hussain were so firm and steadfast in their belief is that they had basira. Was it because they prayed and recited the Quran and that sort of stuff? Sure, but that's not all. Let me give you an example. Khawarij also recited the Quran. Khawarij also prayed day and night. Ibn Abbas is sent by the commander of the faithful to go to Nahrawan and check up and report back on the Khawarij. He comes back to the Imam. He says, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, I saw a group of people, jibahuhum wa akuffuhum kathafanat al-ibil. Their foreheads and their palms were like the very thick layer of skin on the joints of a camel from praying. and prostrating and bowing down to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says their faces are darkened by their fasting. Their bodies are frail from how much they pray. These were the Khawarij. And yet, did they have any basira? The Khawarij are the same people who came, they killed Khabbab ibn al-Arat, who was one of the companions of Amir al-Mu'mineen. The story is quite famous. He was traveling with his wife who was pregnant, right, in her 3rd trimester. She was pregnant with an infant, with a fetus. So they came to Khabbab ibn al-Arat. They said to him, who is your master? He said, Ali ibn Abi Talib. He said, we're going to give you another chance. Who is your master? He said, Ali ibn Abi Talib, Mawlai wa Mawla al-Mu'mineen. They came to him. They slaughtered him. Then they took his wife. They slaughtered her. Then they stabbed her belly. They took the unborn fetus, slaughtered him, and threw them all in the river. Then they, kept walking as nothing had happened, when all of a sudden one of them noticed a date palm on the ground. He grabbed the date palm, put it in his mouth. All of a sudden everybody screamed, how could you do that? This is haram! Who's the owner of the date palm? Did you ask for permission? They just killed an entire family, including an unborn fetus. And they're worried whether this date palm is halal or haram. It's like a group of Kufans, they came to Ibn Abbas in Hajj, the year after killing Imam Hussain. They came to Mecca. One of them came up to him and he said to him, I have a question, Mawlana. It's a really important question about fiqh. He said, what is it? He said, I had a mosquito on my ihram and I slapped it, so there was a little bit of blood. There's a blood stain on my ihram. Is that okay? Can I continue doing my a'mal? He said to him, قَتَلْتُمْ إِبْنَ بِنْتِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ عَلَى شَاطِئِ الْفُرَاتِ. You were the ones who slaughtered Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, the grandson of Rasulullah, by the Furat, and you deprived him of water. And you're here asking me whether a small blood stain by a mosquito makes your ihram najis or not? Khawarij prayed, fasted. Wahhabis pray, they fast. They go to Hajj every single year. They do Umrah 15 times a year. But do they have basira? No, they don't. They are the most superficial human beings. And that's why, see, we're not saying that praying and fasting and doing these rituals is wrong. Far from it, brothers and sisters. We need to have balance in our lives. There are those who say that you need to take the spiritual out of the ritual. It's the rituals that matter. Wahhabi mentality. Very rough, very dry in the way they look at things. Just the other day, I don't know if you heard about this, but in Saudi Arabia, a man was arrested. Later on, it turned out that he was one of the most famous preachers on multiple satellite TV networks. He would go out and preach to people about goodness, about being good to your family, about treating others well, about honoring your guests and your neighbors and so on and so forth. And yet he's arrested for, guess what? He's arrested for beating his 6-year-old daughter to death. They took her body to the morgue and she was bruised from head to toe, the coroner's report say. He killed her. And his wife says that this was a consistent, persistent pattern. He'd beat her up all the time. And whenever I tell him, why would you do this? He'd laugh at me. The sadistic animal. And he's a Wahhabi sheikh. They're all like that. They're all like that, more or less. Because their mentality is, get the emotion out of it. There is no emotion. If she needs to be disciplined, she needs to be disciplined, even if it's with a hose. Right? So it says, get the spiritual out of the ritual. You have the other camp, on the other end of the scale, which says, preserve the spiritual and let go of the ritual. I've had people like that. I've heard them say this, where salah is not that important, how it's done, the number of rak'at, all these details, that doesn't matter. It's the thought that counts. It's the intention that matters. It's about you connecting with God, right? But these minor details, they're not that important. Both of these are wrong. You have to have the ritual because the ritual reinforces the spiritual, and you have to have the spiritual because it's the spirit of our faith. It's what makes the ritual make sense. And makes it rewarding. Anyway, so to have basira is to look deeper than the superficial surface of things. It is to learn about your faith so that, brothers and sisters, you don't come across a single shubha a single doubt, a single anti-Islamic website or an anti-Shia TV channel doesn't sway you from the straight path. How do we acquire basira? Is something that we also need to talk about, though we don't have a lot of time. But number one, taqwa. The fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you're sinful, God forbid, and I know you're not, but if you're the kind of person who is completely enshrouded by sin, then there's no way you can acquire basira. There's no way you can have that guiding light at times of darkness, in times of turbulence. In order to get that guiding light, يَجْعَلْ لَهُمْ نُورًا, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran. In order to get that light, the moral compass, the ability to put yourself on autopilot and hope that you're going to make it to safe shores, that's basira. You know how you see people sometimes, they're so certain about their beliefs. It's like they're unshakable. Number one, taqwa. The fear of the position of Allah's authority. Avoiding sins, no matter how small they seem, no matter how insignificant they look. Number two, knowledge. Acquire knowledge. Read up on Islam. Read up on the Imams. Learn about their lives. Read their maxims and their words of exhortation. See things deeper than the shallow surface. The companions of Abu Abdullah al-Hussain were exactly like that. One of them comes to the Imam. There were two actually, called Al-Ghifariyan, Abdullah wa Abdul Rahman Al-Ghifari, referred to as a duo, Al-Ghifariyan. They came to the Imam on the day of Ashura. They said to him, Ya Aba Abdullah, nuhibbu an nuqtala bayna yadayk. Ya Aba Abdullah, we don't expect you to come to our side at the time of our death. We don't deserve that. We have no such expectation. We don't want anything from you. The only thing we'd like you to give us your blessing for is to die as you watch us. نُحِبُّ أَن نُقْتَلَ بَيْنَ يَدَيْكَ. We'd like to go together, because we're two brothers, and fight in order to protect you and get killed while you watch us. Abu Abdullah al-Hussain also says to the family of Muslim ibn Aqil, to Al-Aqil, the family of Aqil were exterminated on the day of Ashura. None of the members of Aqil's lineage remained. They were all killed, subhanallah. The Prophet used to say, I love Aqil, the brother of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Perhaps one of the reasons was that he knew that this would be a man who would produce offspring, who would provide the greatest, most noble examples of courage, bravery, loyalty, generosity, compassion, faith, belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of Ashura. He knew that they would put up for display the greatest examples for all of humanity. The Imam comes to his family after the death of Muslim ibn Aqil. The Imam says to them, Hasbukum bisahibikum. You know, you have offered your sacrifice. Muslim is now dead. You don't have to get killed. You could go back. One of them, who was like their official spokesperson, he gets up and says, Ya Aba Abdullah, Wallah, la natrukuk, wa nuqtalu dunak mahma hasal. By God, we will never leave you. We will all be killed while you watch us and you're still alive. These are the companions of Abu Abdullah al-Hussain. Now, moving on, the day of Ashura, Lady Zainab had these companions to rely on. Lady Zainab had Abbas to rely on. Lady Zainab had Abu Abdullah. She had Ali al-Akbar. She had faith that these people would defend her. She had faith that these people would not let the enemy get their hands on the camp. Lady Zainab expected them to defend the women and the children of Abu Abdullah al-Hussain. But then there was a moment when Zainab looked around. Abbas was no longer there. Akbar was no longer there. Qasim was no longer there. Habib, Muslim, Burayr, Zuhair, they were all gone. Historians say Zainab came فقالت كلمة, she said something, أبكت العدو والصديق. She said something that made everybody cry, the enemy and the friend. In other words, even the enemies of Ahlulbayt cried when Zainab said these words. What were they? Zainab came to the side of the killing pit. She called out, أخي يا أبا عبد الله, أأنت أخي, أأنت ابن والدي, are you my brother? Are you the son of my father? Then she came to the side of Abu Abdullah. The first thing she did was she rolled him onto his back. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Why was Abu Abdullah face down? I don't want to say what Shimr had done to your master. Then she said, Akhi, anta akhi. Why would Zainab not recognize Abu Abdullah? I don't want to say what the horse's hooves had done to him. Then she called out, بأبي المظلوم حتى قضى, بأبي المحموم حتى مضى, بأبي العطشان حتى مضى. May my father be sacrificed for the one who died whilst thirsty, the one who died calling out, أسقوني شربة من الماء وحق جدي أنا عطشان. By my grandfather I'm thirsty. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. Let's all recite this portion of the ziyarah of Abu Abdullah al Hussain. If you can all recite ziyarat Ashura every day for these 10 days, may Allah bless you. It's the least we can do. But if you can't, let's all recite this portion. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليكم مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار, ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين ورحمة الله وبركاته. صلوات.